Thank you, Kimberly. Oh, some peace and quiet. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Overview and Scrutiny for Services. I am going to use some chairman's discretion and jiggle the agenda about so we concentrate on the things we should be concentrating. So we'll run through that in a minute. Just a couple of things I would like to say. Councillor Else decided to resign following some comments that were made on social media. I won't go into or make any comment on what those comments may or may not be, because I don't think that's my role as a chair. But I just wanted to place on record my thanks to Councillor Else for her excellent work over quite a long time now, many years. I've always found her to be dedicated and professional, and she's always contributed, and you could always tell she'd read the papers, probably not always to the delight of some of our colleagues from Waverley who had the questions from it, but she put time and effort to do the job properly, and I'm very grateful. Just one other thing to the other members of the Overview and Scrutiny, I want you to know I value your contributions. I think scrutiny is a really important role of any councils, and I think we do a good job. So thank you for the work that you do. Okay, so if we can turn to the agenda, please. So item 1, which is the minutes. Has anybody got any comments on the previous minutes? That's the 21st of June. They have been published. I can see no nods of disapproval, so I will take them as approved and I'll deal with them afterwards. So apologies for absence and substitution. I've mentioned Councillor Else, and I welcome Councillor Richard Seaborn, who's stepped into the breach, so thank you for doing that. Do we have any others?
We do, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Peter Marriott, and Councillor Jung Hegan was inadvertently added as a committee member. She is actually a substitute, not a member. Thank you.
We almost got away with that one. Declarations of interest.
None received prior to the meeting, Chairman.
Thank you. And any questions from members or questions from the public?
None received, Chairman.
Okay. So what I plan to do is we will very, very quickly do item 6, but I think there's probably only one point we'll raise. If there are any burning issues, please shout. I'd rather, spend the time looking at the carbon neutrality action plan, which I think is the main bulk, rather than spend 2 hours before we get to it and then having to rush it and we all get grumpy. So, Mark, there's pages 7 to 14. I think it's one issue to raise. If you could raise that, and then we'll just ask if everyone else is happy.
Yes, sorry, just say, I might slightly overstate things to say one issue, but I can get through it pretty quickly, is to say your comments and recommendations on the green spaces for our strategy are being integrated, and I believe the team will email you about that separately in due course, so you can kind of see how that's been responded to specifically within the revised strategy. In terms of upcoming items, I'd just highlight local planning enforcement action plans now coming in November, I believe. I was also going to recommend the Safer Waverley Partnership. The ASB PSPO update. That was scheduled for next meeting, but that was supposed to be a 1-year update, and by the sounds of it, the PSPO only came into effect a couple of months ago. So I suggest we push that back to next summer.
Thank you, Mark. Any comments on those 2 points? I think with the ASB work is pointless reviewing something that hasn't been implemented. Otherwise, we don't know whether there's going to be an impact, and we don't know whether there's any displacement. So for those 2 items, are people happy with that? Councillor Darcy.
I just wondered if the date against the ASB PSPO update should be June 23 then, is that right?
It very much should be, yes. Thank you for spotting that.
Okay, any other comments on the work programme? If not, My apologies, didn't see you.
Thanks, Chair. Just in relation to the recommendations made in the biodiversity action plan, I sat in on the executive meeting where these were considered. I have to say there were times during that meeting when it felt like I was sitting on the end of a game of Chinese whispers. Stuff that I felt we'd had a really good constructive meeting with good suggestions made. And some of them got to the executive and clearly weren't represented in quite the way that they left our meeting. In fairness to the executive, they did point out that both the chair and vice chair were invited to attend to clarify the executive briefing, and no one was present, so an opportunity was missed there. I suspect the wording that went to them as well maybe wasn't as precise as it could have been. So I think there were genuine misunderstandings on the part of the executive, but they ended up having discussions. For instance, the request for an executive summary. We never requested an executive summary. We requested a brief introduction, just mapping out the way the report was structured, because the policy actually took about 20 pages to get to the policy. But that was treated in quite a light-hearted way by the leader, thinking, why do you need an executive summary? There's already an executive summary. And they seem to have backed off and agreed that some words can be put in. The point is, had that been clarified in advance, I think the request for a simple paragraph up front would have been probably accepted in good grace. So I think what I'm saying here is that it might be rather good if the chair or the vice chair are unable to attend executive briefings, because we're all very busy and have alternative matters to attend. Would it be possible for a member of the committee who had been present at the meeting to attend, just to make sure that there is absolute clarity? Because if the executive don't fully understand the points we were making, then we're wasting our time. And I genuinely think that there was an element of time wasted, both on the part of the executive, not understanding what we wanted, and on our part in the last meeting, because points weren't conveyed clearly. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, they hold those meetings on a Tuesday, which is the one day I normally cannot make under any circumstances, because I sit in cabinet myself, and the two conflict. I certainly would not personally have a problem with one of the members here going. It's whether the executive, it's their meeting. And I'm sure Councillor Williams has probably just heard that conversation, can take that back and ask that question. Because I think you're absolutely right. What it was a very brief summary, which probably was going to be about half a page, if that. And I think they took it was kind of a rewrite of the whole of the summary of the document. Councillor Williams, I'll let you come back if I've got that interpretation wrong.
Yeah, I mean, essentially the executive is always willing to host the chair of the overview and scrutiny committees to attend the meetings to which they are invited.
Yeah, that's fine. Like I said, unfortunately, it contradicts with I have a weekly meeting at Reigate for cabinet, so I can't do two meetings at the same time. It was unfortunate the vice chair for, Councillor Mulliner was also not available from his scrutiny. So the question was, would the executive be happy for a member of this committee who has led on an item to ensure that there's clarity on what's being put forward?
I mean, obviously, I can't respond on behalf of the executive to that question, and I'm not sure whether there was a request received either for a substitute or for a rescheduling of that item, because I think in either case, then those representations would certainly be looked upon favourably by the executive.
Okay, well, there wasn't a request because I think the suggestion's just been put, and I think the suggestions is now that we would like you to put to the executive on our behalf that in future, if I or the vice chair are unable to attend, which can happen on a regular basis, that a member of this committee can stand in, whoever's led on that, and that, you know, it's not a political thing, whoever's led on the item can then ensure clarity. Because I think on that item, I think it would have helped, because I think the executive may have thought it was a rewrite that was being asked. In fact, it was just a very brief summary to help understand the way that the report was. And I think that probably could have been done in about 10 lines, you know, very, very simple, and would have made it a much better document in our view. So I think it's from this day on, we would like to put that suggestion that if I, you know, I normally cannot do, but I'm sure one of my colleagues will be happy to do that if we can't get a representative. And if you could ask that question to the leader and just let me know, that would be good.
I think if the committee makes that representation via Mark, then obviously that will go to executive and executive will respond to that. But it certainly was, if I recollect correctly, sort of disappointing for the executive not to have been able to have had representation from the committee at the relevant meeting, so that the executive could respond appropriately and have the appropriate discussion with the chair of the committee, which is always valuable. Thanks.
Okay, well, we've identified an issue, we've identified a solution. So, Mark, if you know, probably most of them I can't go, but if Peter can't, then Peter will offer it to the person you feel most appropriate in the future. Okay, any other questions on the forward work programme? Okay, so no then. Okay, now for in relation to corporate performance, my proposal is, because last time I think we spent about an hour and a half, and it meant the rest of the discussion was rather stifled because I think we'd lost the will at that stage. I have two suggestions which I'm happy to run with. Firstly, we do a 10-minute slot and 10-minute only of any major issues that need to be aired tonight. Bearing in mind that the report is, you know, 3 months out of date in its data. So any points we raise are 3 months out of date anyway. Or if there's an absolute burning desire to go through it, we do it at the end. So we concentrate on the carbon neutrality plan and any discussion on the leisure management contract, and then go to any performance issues if there's a desire.
Your first suggestion, Chairman, I think was very appropriate.
So we'll do literally a couple of minutes, but if it goes, it's 15:15 now, if it goes anywhere near to 25 past, I will call it, and then we can take it outside the meeting. So please be very precise on any points you want to raise. If we get time at the end of the meeting, we can always go back to it. Okay, so pages should be pages 79 from your papers. No, sorry, I've got pages 15 to 78. Okay, so we've now got Jenny, who's going to quickly talk through it. Jenny, I apologise. I'm putting you on a bit of a time limit at the start of the meeting, but I'm sure you understand.
Yes, good evening. There's not really too much to say. The only thing to note is that the financial figures were they're not representative of the first quarter. They are as at the end of the accounting period 4. Graham Clark felt that those were the most appropriate figures to use, as they were the latest, the most up-to-date figures available at the time of compiling the report. I think any queries will either be dealt with any heads of services who are available this evening, and if they're not available, I will take the questions away and come back to you if that's all right.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. I'm looking across to see if there's any points that urgently need to be made before we open it up. No, I mean, the 3 months out of date, it doesn't really help, does it? It's 3 months, and by the time they get to your next meeting, they're 6 months out of date. So, okay, opening it up to the floor of questions and areas of concern. Councillor Seaborne.
Thank you, Chairman. Some points for Richard Homewood, please. On page 47 of the report, which is page 65 of our papers, there's a statement made that various services remain fragile, which one can understand. This includes the emptying of street litter bins. Can I query the efficiency of what appears to be the current arrangement, which gives the impression of being reactive rather than proactive? For the multiple public bins in Bramley, collection of waste appears to happen only after bins have overflowed, and a member of the public, which is often me, sends a message in and requests that they're cleared. And it's quite common for one bin on the Downs Link near Windrush Close to end up surrounded and capped with piles of plastic dog waste bags. This is quite common, and then there've been occasions where I've gone, having been prompted in seeing this, I've gone around other bins in the village and found several in the same state. So is my understanding correct that the service is largely reactive? Because it seemed to me altogether better for residents that the waste is collected on a regular basis, with all the bins collected at one time, rather than members of the public having to flag a problem and reaction happening after people have been rather put off by the state of them for quite a while.
Councillor Reid, if I come to you next, and then maybe there's a follow-on questions.
Thank you, Chair, but I'm not quite sure Councillor Seaborne is talking about domestic waste or litter on the streets and the litter bins on the streets and dog waste on the streets. Could he please clarify that?
Yeah, I'm talking about public bins on the streets.
Okay, thank you. And I've seen it myself on several of the bags on the floor. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. It shouldn't be reactive now. We should be back to a situation now where there should be regular emptying. I'm happy to take that away and raise that with the contractor, because it should be back to routine collections now and emptying of litter bins.
Councillor Reid.
I know this has happened in the past tense in Cranley, and we've only heard last week by our environmental officer, local one, Darren Olfold, that new ones have been installed. So I'm very pleased about that. But prior to that, we did have a similar problem. Thank you.
Okay. I think that the point's been well made, and I think it's probably more general than just Bramley, but we can always pick that up if other areas are having the same problems over the next few months.
Yeah, certainly, Chair. I mean, during the peak of COVID, resources were diverted to refuse and recycling collections with people off sick in the Biffa crews. But certainly now we're getting to a stabler position with sickness absence, etc. So they should be back to routine emptying of litter bins across the borough.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Coburn, and then Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I mean, the Bourne bins are also overflowing, by the way. But I wanted to bring in collections. You've just said they're getting back to normal. Just recently, they've been atrocious. And what's worse is that when people have tried to report the fact that, their things haven't been collected, they haven't been able to do that, even though they've gone into the website and done everything. And of course, that just makes them doubly cross, because it means one thing to have your bin missed. Certainly our food waste wasn't collected, but, we reported it. Going up the drive, there was a whole load of stuff out. So obviously other people had missed other collections. And I just happened to call in on my daughter about 2 or 3 days later, and she said it's a fortnight since they've been. And that's a totally different bit of the Bourne. So, you know, it certainly just recently has been poor just in our area. So if you could just look into why, because residents have tried to complain and haven't managed to get anything back from their complaint on the website, which, as I say, is actually one of the worst problems, and actually having the misspin at the first time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to bring up two things which I can't seem to find any details of. At the executive summary, it says there is mention of putting, what does it say? It says, open new bike shelters in council-owned car parks. Now, for about 6 months last year, there was a long discussion going on about the most appropriate bike shelter to go into Farnham Central Car Park because several designs were looked at. I haven't heard anything for a long time, and certainly there's been no new bike shelter opened in Farnham Central Car Park that I've seen. So that's one thing. And the other thing is I'm looking at both the assets page and at the culture and arts page, and there doesn't seem to be an update on the Farnham Museum. And we do know that they went through to the second round, I think, of funding this year, which was a great success. But I wondered if there was any further update or whereabouts in this report we might find mention of that. Thank you.
Sure. Kelvin, are you able to deal with that one?
Certainly, Chairman, thank you. There isn't an update specifically in this quarter on the Museum Farnham, but I can update Councillor Dixon that we are through to the second round of amend 2 application, the closing date of which is the 30th of September. So we are on schedule to get our application in. We've had a meeting with Mend themselves. They've been to site and feel it's a very positive project. So we're on target to make the application on the 30th this month.
If I can, Chair, we've installed cycle shelters in Godalming, Cranley and Hazelmere. There are still further discussions to be had about the most suitable design and the most suitable location for one in Farnham. So I think those discussions are waiting to continue with Farnham Town Council and the Farnham councillors. But at the moment, we haven't resolved the issue around where and what type to have in Farnham.
Yeah, I think one of the last emails I saw, they were saying to the councillors, why don't you come back with your preferred design? And at which point, you know, it did get a bit creative and people dropping pictures on the internet left, right and centre. And it did,
I think we're probably straying to details about it, but I think that you can take that one off with Richard too, because I don't think it's something we can resolve here.
Can I just, in terms of the refuse collection, Councillor Coburn, I'm concerned to hear what you're saying. Things should be improving, and I'll certainly take that back to BIFA as well and find out what's going on.
We are talking about several roads. It's not just one road. So I don't know what happened, but it was only that the picture sort of evolved as I went round and talking to people in different roads, you know, about totally different things, and they all moaned about their bins. So obviously there wasn't an issue.
If I can, Chair, one of the problems we have had is relief drivers, where they've had driver shortages. They're bringing in relief drivers who are not familiar with areas and will miss, you know, harder to find properties and that sort of thing. But they certainly shouldn't be missing whole streets, and I'll take that back to them.
Okay, thank you. Looking through the performance, there's a couple that jump out for me. Page 55, which is page 69 of the pack, which is performance for planning. Good to see some of them have improved. P151 has improved, but P151A has gone down from Q4 to the first quarter, which I think is quite disappointing. But it's good to see some greens rather than just pure reds there. That's always good. And the same on the other page. So there are some positive trends, but there's some trends that are still going the wrong direction. So that probably just needs to be looked at further. And the actual complaint statistics, which is under table 10.5, so going back a few pages, we're going in the wrong direction again there. So I think that's quite disappointing. If we can just, yeah.
Hi, Councillor Denis. Hi, Chair. I'd like just to raise a couple of points, if I may, on behalf of the planning service. 1P151A, 153A and 123A. I would like, if possible, to query the relevance of those now for future ONS. The 151, the A's were their internal reviews based on numbers of applications without extensions of time. Now, based on the extensions of time have been reinstated in the planning service and are being used legitimately. As you can see, the green figures represent that. The 151's A's are, for the foreseeable future, always going to represent the backlog where extension of times weren't used. So they're always going to show a detrimental figure for the foreseeable future because of the said that backlog over those 2 years. So they are, I don't believe, ever going to show a positive return. I say ever, sorry, for the foreseeable future, going to show a positive return because we are looking at the 2-year backlog, which that encompasses. The figure that we report for national statistics with the extension of time are the 151s, the 123s, the 153s without the A, where we are legitimately using extensions of time where appropriate. The other one I would just like to raise to point out, if I may, is P6, which represents the, it's, as you can see, it's a 0%. That also needs to be readdressed because the P6 is for pre-applications with 28 days reporting. As of the 1st of July, the pre-application service for planning is a completely different structure where that 28 days is no longer appropriate. So that would need to be revisited, otherwise that number will always be skewed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
The relevance for us is if they're in the performance document, then we, our role is to scrutinise them. So if some of them need to be rejigged because it changes, then we need to do that. But if they're in the document and they show a red and a downward trend, then our role is to ask why. Councillor Coburn.
I wonder if I can just use this opportunity to ask Sally something I've asked you privately, but it's about getting information, because I find as a councillor at the moment, I just can't find relatively simple information, which would save me taking up officer time, asking for it. And we've started getting some appeals information now, but it's in a format that really is not anything like as helpful as the format we used to get, which was simplified for councillors basically. So, you knew what type of appeal, the status of it, the outcome of the ones that were decided. There were basically, appeals decided, appeals pending, and it was just sort of very easy information to find out. And when I come to sort of housing figures, on things like what has actually been achieved, what has been allowed, or the decision to grant, I find it really hard just to get this sort of what I call the basics to understand for myself whether or not the system is really working, because this is always a bit behind the time anyway. I don't think percentages are necessarily as informative as the actual figures. So I'm really just making a plea for any sort of information, just information on housing performance, housing delivery, things that we can then save having to, write a complicated email asking for updates, because if we can see the figures and ongoing figures, because again, I know planning is up to a point, a moment in time, but there comes a point where we should be having running totals that we can actually access as well, so that we know that we're either delivering more houses or fewer. We again shouldn't have to sort of go back to a difficult format or an officer to find out. So anything you could do just to keep the information up to date, sort of, and available to us very simply, that would be a great help. And I think it would just help us understand what's going on much more than sometimes these performance targets. Thank you.
I do remember those reports, and they were dead simple. They were obviously just cut and pasted across. can I ask, Carol, if you'd be kind enough to offline have a chat about what would be useful for councillors? Because like you, sometimes I don't know the results. I don't know what's happened on the appeals, and you go online and it's not up to date, maybe. Would you mind having that conversation with what would be useful for the future as a suggestion? I mean, it was an easy document, and I'm sure we can find one. It just said pending, allowed. You know, it just gave a 1 or 2 pages, and you knew everything in a very, very quick glance without having to come and ask you. Okay, any other questions from anyone? Councillor Seaborn?
Thanks. Yeah, just a quick one on exactly the same theme that we've just been talking about. Comment to Sally. There have been several applications in my ward, sorry, our ward, recently, where the application target date has been changed. We're not generally used to seeing anything change on the details section of the planning website. You know, most of the information that gets added goes into the documents section underneath. So you don't always pick up on these extensions of target dates. And I've been irritating Sally about the status of Bramley applications, and she rightly pointed out that a few of them weren't quite as bad as I thought because deadlines had changed. I made the request, would it be possible for when a deadline is extended or a new target date is set, that could be added rather than just the date changed? Because, as I say, you don't tend to go looking for changes in the details section, but if there's an amended target date underneath it, then it's going to be much more apparent to me anyway, and it would certainly help. Each week I go through all of these things. It would just help understanding things and stopping me wasting the time of the planning team. So that's a request. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a small issue, but makes life a lot easier, and so I would support that. And I'm sure if we can do that without too much difficulty, it would be very welcome. Any other issues people would like to raise on the performance? I think other than a comment, it's so out of date. You get to a stage where this point is raising some of the issues are 3 months old anyway. I think as an organisation, we need to be better at getting much live data as we can. Anything else before I move on, because I have not kept to my own deadline? Okay, so we'll move on from that. So thank you everybody who's contributed to that. If there is anything, if you can take it offline, if you still have that desire. So if we move then to item 8, which is a carbon neutrality action plan, which are pages 79 to 136. Fatini, I think you're going to present on this. And before I do, I see a hand up, so Councillor Reid.
I'm sorry, but before Fatini does her presentation, I did have one question, which I think is quite important for us as a council. Page 65, I'm sorry to go back, but no. This concerns compensation. Question for Richard Homewood, our officer. Because pavement licensing, which was transferred to the borough during COVID, it seems now that we're taking that on as a council. Surely this has cost implications, and if so, are we being compensated? And presumably we're taking it over from Surrey permanently. Thank you. Sorry, Fatini.
No, absolutely no clue, so I'll defer to Richard to answer that one.
Yes, the trial period in COVID was for all local authorities across the country, not just for Surrey and Waverley. And the decision has been made by the government to continue that permanently now, that the boroughs and districts will administer pavement licensing. We still have to liaise closely with the county council and listen to their objections if they have any, but it is something that boroughs and districts will now continue to operate, and we are assured that the revenue support grants have been adjusted to reflect the additional costs to the boroughs and districts. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. So we'll go back to Fatini. That's all right. Fatini, over to you.
Oh, thank you. Good evening to you all. So the carbon neutrality action plan is well, the second update of it is presented here to you today. That's less than a year since the previous update. That was mainly to align with the budget setting period. So it includes an update of actions, and it celebrates some of our successes and highlights again how much work we still need to do. It also includes the greenhouse gas report, which presents the non-domestic emissions of the council, of organisational emissions for 21-22. It also includes a new trajectory, which takes into consideration some new proposals such as biodiesel, switching our waste fleet potentially to biodiesel, and the report also includes the latest version of the actual plan. It includes some the completed actions at the end of it, but also revised actions for the year ahead of us. The new version of the plan also addressed some of the comments, feedback that we had from UK with Climate Emergency UK scorecards, which, as you may know, our action plan scored 5th place in second-tier authorities in the country, which is great. So we've included some of the feedback from that in the new iteration of the plan. It does recognise there's a lot more to do. Just wanted to remind everyone that it is a live document and by no means a definitive product. Over the last few months, 8 months, we've been looking at whole building approach, examining our buildings, corporate buildings, and carrying out a number of audits just to understand what it is that we need to do to decarbonise those buildings. We also recognise that renewable energy is quite important in order to deliver the carbon neutrality target, and we are bringing a number of proposals forward over the next couple of months. So that's sort of in a very quick run of the report, and I just wanted to now invite your comments and your observations. I'm more than happy to respond. Thank you.
Councillor Dixon.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at the short-term actions starting on page 127. There seems to be some contradictions and some things that need to be updated, because I don't know what, perhaps Fatina, you could ask, when was this list last updated? I'm just saying because
I'm just looking at which page, because it might be a little bit confusing. We've got a spreadsheet annex, which is an progress update of last year's action plan. Is that what you're referring to?
No, I'm looking
Dixon?
at page 127 to 120.
Okay, let me.
31.
It'll be page 27 of your action plan.
Okay. Well,
okay, yeah. So that would be the new version.
Okay, so just
of the plan.
A couple of things. Right. For instance, if we take on page 128, line 021 or O21, orange 21, it says switch to the green tariff at the end of the current energy procurement contract. Okay, so are we actually going to have any choice at the end of the current energy procurement contract? Is there not going to be an issue with energy prices having increased due to the war in Ukraine? And is switching to a green tariff even a viable option for December 2022?
Okay, so that particular action was something we had considered last year. And it's something that we will consider again when the energy procurement contract comes up for renewal, which will be next year. But obviously, we will take into consideration what impact that will have and whether it's financially viable. So it is definitely something that we will look again. But what I can't say for sure is that yes, we're absolutely doing it at any cost, because that's a decision for the executive.
But this is saying it's going to be done in December 2022, which is in 2 months' time.
I think it's the review of it. So if that's not clear enough, then I can
No,
consider that. Yeah,
It says
that's fine. Thank you.
target date. The other thing, okay, a couple of other things. You've got O24 on page 128, which is develop a staff plan which complementary business travel to encourage staff to use car club, zero carbon pool cars and active travel incentives.
Mhm.
Have you thought about working from home? And then the other one, you've got a similar one, you're saying on O04, nudge Surrey County Council to consider alternative ways for staff to travel to get to work. So again, you could be looking more at working from home or additional hybrid
Yeah.
working. So, so
Which we
this is
already
why I'm
do.
thinking
Yeah.
that the terminology in here doesn't seem to reflect even the current world that we live in. You know, why are we still talking about getting a car club?
Because so
zero
that
carbon?
is, sorry, that this
Yeah.
is taking into consideration all those the people that have to come into the office. So it's not instead of, it's in addition to. So one of our targets is that we will reduce we will reduce commute by 60%, which
Yes.
we have more or less done. You know, the officers don't come into the office more than once or twice a week. I don't think it's general principle, obviously. So these actions are in addition to that.
Okay.
So for those that do come into the office, because there's a business need for them to come into the office, how do we vary, you know, how do we give them different options in terms of how they do their business mileage?
Well, what I would have
So
liked
that's
to-
what they
what I've
they
liked to
are.
have seen for both of these action plans was for them to be updated to say that working from home is now frequently adopted by staff, and Zoom meetings are often used to reduce meetings. If it you know, just feels a bit out of date, the copy, if this is our action plan. Okay, so the first things I've mentioned was the working from home. I've talked about the energy renewables in December. And then the third thing is you've got a number of entries here which are to do with changing the energy options in either senior living units and also in the council homes. So like you've got E02, where you're saying review renewable energy options in senior living units to increase renewable energies. And then you've got develop plans for alternative gas boilers in existing and council homes based on pilot scheme. So I'm assuming that we're talking about replacing gas boilers with air heat pumps. But when we last talked about this, I think we were agreement one, air hose heat pumps are incredibly expensive. Even as private homeowners, not many of us can afford them. And two, the efficiency is not very good. And three, I've looked into them and it often means changing your radiators. So this, and you know, if we're trying to do this and remain carbon neutral, it's going to be really expensive. So again, this plan to go to air source heat pumps and replace them in the council houses has been queried before. And it's still in here, and it's still for March 2023, which again is in 6 months' time. I really can't see the price of these air source heat pumps coming down in any way that's going to make it viable for us to put 4,000 of them into our council houses next year. It's just not going to be possible. And finally, the thing that's really annoying me, and I know it annoys all council members, is 02 and 03, where you say you're going to stop giving us paper minutes. Now, we've spoken about this before. It is not, and I repeat, not acceptable to put a PDF onto a website and tell us to get on with it. That doesn't work. We cannot do our jobs with that. We need to be able to read the documents. You cannot read a 140-page document as a PDF successfully and make notes about it. We've not had any demonstrations of technology that will make our lives any easier. There are technologies out there. We've just see a very sort of cynical approach to this, in that people are just putting minutes in a PDF format onto a website and just leaving us to get on with it. It is really not helping us to do our jobs. And if you are really taking all paper away from us by December 22, I would have expected that we would have had training for councillors before now on how to make the most of the systems we've got. Also, we know for a fact that the planning system doesn't work. I have complaints from the Farnham Town Council planning officers again and again and again. It takes them hours and hours and hours to try and work through planning officers. And now you're expecting us to inflicting the same system on every single other meeting we have to attend. Now, I just think that this is, until you do something about the systems, you cannot implement that policy, full stop. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I have to admit, I agree. I find my computer is about as reliable as a chocolate fire guard. It asks me for passwords, so I know I'm putting the right password, but won't let me in. You know, it's difficult to navigate. Keyboard won't connect with the screen. And I don't get a very good signal. So I have to have documents because otherwise I don't get to read the documents. So I do agree with that. Councillor Coburn.
So do I. Nearly stood up and cheered while you were speaking, Councillor Dixon, but felt I should restrain myself. My concerns about this, and I've raised it before, and I raised it with the biodiversity action plan as well, is I don't see how we join all this together. And this really worries me. I did an interview for a child doing, well, young man doing an IB, International Baccalaureate, and he's doing something on politics, and he was going to interview me and then interview various other people. And he asked me, it was all to do with the environment, and he asked me what my frustrations were. And I said, well, it's the lack of joined up thinking, this is the bit that really frustrates me. And reading through this, you know, I am frustrated because it says at one point, review local plan part 1 climate change policies. I have no problem with that as long as it's done very quickly. But what the issue is that we have things written in our current policies which we don't insist upon. You know, when something comes in to planning, we raise issues of flooding, of sustainable development, of materials. We raise all of this, and I don't know, sometimes it's when it goes to appeal, sometimes it's our fault, but we actually are giving permission for inefficient houses, you know, day after day, but certainly meeting after meeting. And if we are serious, yes, we can monitor what we do here, but our policies should all join up. So when we're giving planning permissions, our climate change strategy should feed into the planning. When we, and so should especially the biodiversity action plan. So, you know, it worries me that we have these neat little lines and whatever, but we actually don't do what our local plan, climate change policies insist on now. So how are we going to improve all this new housing that's going up, which is of inferior design, inferior in terms of its sustainability, and we just don't seem to be joining it up, and it's been a frustration of mine. And it, you know, when I was talking to this child, that's what came out really. We've got strategy after strategy, we've got words galore. We don't really need any more words, but what to me we don't seem to have is a joined up strategy for what we're trying to do. Obviously we're trying to influence other residents in the borough by what we try to do, but also, you know, the planning system should be playing a much greater part in improving the environment, not just harming it all the time. Thank you.
Okay, hopefully Mark's got those. Well, I see the 2 points from that then is how we linking this into other strategies. So how do they actually link in? And I think the second point is probably the most important one, which was how are we linking this into planning, our planning applications and approvals and conditions and everything else. Because I know Councillor Darcy has mentioned it in planning once or twice, that we have all of these great plans, but we don't really seem to be able to give conditions that actually make it a reality. And you're absolutely right. So hopefully, Mark, you can put those two into actions with the points previously made.
Chairman, we can't agree this pages 127 to 131 because it just feels like it hasn't been updated. You know, they're talking about trying to get staff to cut their car costs, but they don't mention working from home. It's just not joined up.
Okay, well, we'll look at what the actions, what the recommendations are on this when we've had all the discussion, because it was the first one, for example, is that we note the progress made. Well, are we noting the poor progress made? Are we noting the progress made, but actually still not producing the goods that we want it to produce? I never really like that recommendation, so maybe we can look at some different wording. Yeah, we'll come back to it and how we're going to word our recommendations. But I know Mr. Williams in the back will be listening and making notes and listening to our comments. Because the whole point is that we give the comments, they're taken away, and we improve and continuously improve the documents and what we do. Sorry. Oh, I can't see it. Fatina, if you'd like to come back, and then then I'll go to Councillor Wojciechowski.
Thank you, Chairman. I wholeheartedly agree with what's already been said, and I have particular interest in what Councillor Coburn said as well. I know this is a live document, and I know it's going to continue to evolve. And I know there's a starting point in all of this, so both of those have to be at the forefront of our imagination when we are dealing with something like this. But in many aspects, it is very very adventurous. It is very broad. It is very open to a lot of frustrations and criticism, because it's very difficult to join all the dots up together, because you need the help and support. A couple of the items on here are subject to external contractors. And coming back to Councillor Coburn's point of view when she was talking about planning, you know, these contractors already have policies in situ. And when I look at, it's on page 129 and it's 025, feasibility studies of the leisure centre. Well, are we connecting with Kelvin and his department to actually talk about what is in the KPIs for the new contracts for the leisure centres, the 5 across the borough? If not, then that is something that is critical and it shouldn't be missed, because it's all part of it. And then when I look at 028 to explore options with the Biffa fleet, well, we know that waste contractors are, you know, they're cut to a very fine thread. There's very little money in those contracts. And I just wonder how on earth a contractor can do something on such a scale, and especially as the contract is in situ for a number of years to come. So coming back to the points that have been raised, the dates, as I say, I know you've got to have a starting point, and I know but I think at the same time, there must be, to have credibility in a report like this, you must have some clear, defined evidence that says things are achievable. And I can't see on those 2 points how they actually are achievable. And when I look at page 129 TO4, how on earth are we going to develop and implement plans of a network to cycle routes across Waverley in partnership with Surrey County Council, ensuring that by 2030 all towns and main population centres are connected by dedicated cycle routes, Guildford and the Godalming Greenway? It sounds great in theory, but is it actually going to happen? And how? And more, the public are getting more and more frustrated by cyclists. They are, I'm afraid, they are. And, you know, I think the only way you can actually have some real, but this is a government thing, I know, is we need to be asking our cyclists to contribute towards the road usage as well, and penalties for them, because they commit traffic offences as well, albeit on bikes. So, you know, I'm pleased to see that there is a report before us. I'm pleased to say it's evolving. There is a lot of work to do, it was already said, but I do think we need some actual achievable, realistic goals in here, and we need to take into account exactly what's been said before, the policy of contractors, what's already in existence. If they don't marry, you can't support this, because your contractors are going to say, no, we can't do it, and therefore this is never going to happen. So thank you for allowing me to speak, Chairman.
Thank you. You actually covered one of the bits I was going to raise, which was 028, which is about the Biffa fleet, and a report will be presented to executive with costed proposals. What I couldn't be sure is whose costed proposals. Proposals that we are going to put money into, or what we would like Biffa, who are in a contract, so we can't actually, so maybe Fatini can just clarify that. And the one about T04, about the cycle routes, well, it's fine if you own the land, but if you're going to go from Godalming to Guildford to Farnham and all of that, and there's common land, the issues of replacing common land, but also if it's private land, what are you going to do? I just think it's a lovely aspiration, but I think land ownership is going to be quite difficult on that one. But maybe Fatini's sort of already looked at that. Fatini, do you want to come back in at this stage and I'll open it up again?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on a couple of points, if I may. So just picking up on the point about planning policy and joining up and all the new properties that come online effectively, I think that's a really good point. We recently produced a sustainability SPD to support the current policies. The difficulty with planning, and Sally, I don't know if Sally's still there to sort of support this, but the difficulty with planning is that we can't produce new policies that are not in the local plan. So it takes a little while before we bring new policies in. So we've produced an SPD, sustainability SPD, to further support developments and developers, and encourage sort of more sustainable and low carbon developments. So that should be adopted, I think, in the next. I think it's ready. It's gone through the consultation. I'm not 100% sure where it is in terms of its approval, but it's almost there. But in terms of LPP1, which is due to be reviewed early next year, I think that is a really important opportunity for us, because that is when we can look at new, more ambitious policies to introduce. Because we can't just, we have to have the evidence, so we have to go through this process. So LPP1 is going to be really important. LPP2 hangs off LPP1, which means, again, we can't introduce any new policies. So it is quite a complicated process, but it is a very valid point. Just picking up on a couple of the other points, the linking up with the leisure centres, I absolutely am working very closely with Calvin's team on the leisure centres and places leisure, and we're looking at what opportunities there are and what improvements we can make. We're looking at solar PV. We've done a number of sort of smaller scale energy efficiency projects, LED lighting replacements, and all of that is in partnership with Places Leisure. So I can assure you that we've got a link there. The other point on contractors and Biffa, we do try to stipulate at the beginning, when we procure a contract, what we would like them to do, or how we would like them to perform in terms of their climate change responsibilities, climate emergency responsibilities, and we have done just that with the leisure contract management that is out for tender at the moment. So we have stipulated what we would like to see in the new contract. In terms of Biffa, we are having ongoing discussions with them, although the contract is already, we're in the middle of the contract, but we do have the opportunities to vary some of the elements if the council would be willing to fund them. Obviously, the contractors are not necessarily going to volunteer that. So again, those discussions with Biffa are to identify opportunities, cost those opportunities, and then we will do what we need to do from our side to go through an approval and potentially, budget, a new budget increase process. But that goes through a thorough process, and it's checked. So the point about T04, which is about linking up all the towns and main population centres, actually that is a project that's already underway, and we have a sustainable transport projects officer in the team that is working really closely with Surrey County Council, and the FIP in Farnham more specifically, in order to develop and produce local cycling and walking infrastructure plans. And those plans are exactly that, mapping out where the opportunities are in terms of walking and cycling infrastructure and how we can build that into the planning system. So when new developments come on board, how we sort of design them to enable those routes to become available and make those links. So land ownership is definitely an issue, but by having those plans in place, we can acquire, we can bid for external funding, government funding for some of those routes, but also it gives us the opportunity to embed it into the planning system. So it's not easy, I agree, and it's going to take a long time, but the Waverley LC WIP is underway, as well as the Farnham one. They're separate because of the Farnham infrastructure programme that's in place, but they're very much underway and due to be implemented, hopefully by the end of the year or beginning of next year, to be adopted rather than implemented. I hope this helps.
Thank you for that. I think you made the point it needs to be linked in with planning, and I think it was our original point that we don't think it is particularly well linked into planning. So I think the order was Councillor Coburn, Councillor Dixon and Councillor Forrest. You can, if it's coming back on the point, yes.
Thank you for your response. It's very much appreciated. I do have a little bit of an issue with some of the things though, because hindsight's a wonderful thing. And if we had the knowledge way back then, we'd be in a very different position we are now. And I sat on the task group when we looked at waste contractor a few years ago. And whilst climate change is something dear to my heart, and it should be dear to everybody's heart, we've still got to be realistic. But way back then, it wasn't something that we sort of was top of our agenda. So although we can have a wish list at the beginning of these things, we still got to be realistic that, you know, they may never come to fruition. And in actual fact, I think with rising energy bills and all the rest of it, I think the climate's going to do really well out of it, because I think everybody now is going to be starting to think about how much energy they use, how much money they spend on it. And that in itself is a problem solver. So I think there's an opportunity to write something into here with regards to the energy crisis. There was one other thing as well, and it slipped my mind as to what I was going to say there. I'll come back to it, but thank you for your comments. They're well made, but as I say, I remember sitting on that contract. I remember how in depth it was. I remember how, you know, difficult it was to get the right contractor in place and all the rest of it. But things back then were different to what they are now. So our wish list, we can never actually claim it to be what we would like it to be, because things happen unexpectedly, like COVID and like the energy crisis that we face at the moment. Chairman, thank you again for listening. I hope I'll remember what I was going to say and come back. Thank you.
You're absolutely right, because a few years ago, if you just look at buses, there weren't any hydrogen buses, which is now hydrogen buses in Surrey. You know, there were not the vehicles for Biffa to actually, you know, for that heavy vehicle to actually do it. So now hydrogen's coming in, you know, so as years go on, the opportunities will arise. It was Councillor Dixon and Councillor Coburn.
Yes, I wanted to comment on the LC WIP for Farnham. There's a problem with bundling this up with the FIP. In particular, is that one of the great tragedies of the last year is that we do have in Waverley Borough Council our own in-house expert, our own project manager, sustainability project manager, who worked on the Farnham LC WIP and put together a document which Waverley agreed. However, then FIP came along as the Surrey Atkins team, and they put together a different LC WIP for Farnham. And there are significant differences between what Surrey has proposed for the Farnham LC WIP as part of FIP and the document that Waverley's own expert has produced. And what is really tragic is that I know this because I've had a number of conversations from the cycling group saying that nobody is defending the document that Waverley put together. It is a far superior document, it is much more complex, and it's based on much more detailed local knowledge. And yet there is nobody standing up for the Waverley document, and it's just being steamrolled by a much, looser, less detailed, less thought through documents being imposed on us as part of the FIP in Surrey. And so that should be something I think I would like, as a councillor, I've heard a number of comments that we should Waverley, we should be supporting our own expertise and not letting ourselves be steamrolled by Surrey, especially on this case. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Well, I'm sure whoever's responsible for it can take up the baton on that one. But if it's not been taken up, then you'll get steamrolled. Councillor Coburn.
Thank you. Sorry to come back on planning, but the last thing this borough needs is an in-depth review of local plan part 1. We are absolutely at the moment at the mercy of developers because so far we haven't managed to get our planning documents up to speed. The point I was trying to make was that the climate change policies in local plan part 1 are not that bad. Yes, they need a refresh. Everything would after 5 years. But nearly made a joke then, thought better not. But basically, you know, if you read what we have in our local plan, and I have it in front of me, and you see what actually goes on, that's the problem I have. There's no point in spending months reviewing our climate change policies, while at the time, all the developers are going around like mad, building, you know, houses that shouldn't be built in places we don't want them, when what we're not doing is applying what we actually have. I mean, if you read what we are supposed to be demanding of developers, we wouldn't have the rubbish that's going up. But it's because when it comes into the system, we don't apply the policies we have rigidly, whether that's because we can't or whether it's because, you know, just basically we don't, I don't know. But the point I was trying to make was, you know, don't think that yet more verbiage. I'm just getting so bored with verbiage and strategies and just repeat, when we actually have something in place that would help if we just, you know, really used our planning policies. So, you know, I think we've really got to put our foot down as a borough here and, you know, just not accept the minimum standards of stuff that's going up at the moment and say, look, our policies are already there. We're going to have some strength, we hope, from local plan part 2, but if we tear it all up in February 23, we'll be back to square one, and the same thing will happen, and we'll just have more and more of this rubbish speculatively developed all over the borough, and we really can't afford to do that. We have policies, we have strategies, join them together and use them to protect the borough in this difficult circumstances. That's all I'm saying. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. So if we summarise that into something Mark can then put into our notes, that about a concern that a local plan part 1, the policies we actually already have, which we should be interpreting and implementing, and we should be applying that to current applications. Are people happy with that? And I think, you know, I think they almost need to, when they do a planning application, have a little section on their tick box to say, have you looked, or is it policy C3 or something like that? The CC1 to CC4, that we actually, they have to check that they've matched it against those policies to see whether it complies. And tell us during the planning meetings. Simple. So if we can add something like that. Councillor Seaborn, you've been very patient. Thank you.
At all. Thank you, Chairman. Let me just start by getting a couple of minor points out of the way because they've been irritating me all day. But I would point out that Councillor Williams' forward on page 4 of the updated plan is dated September 2023. I admire his optimism on his chances of being re-elected next May, but I think it's probably September 2022 is rather more appropriate at this time. And also footnotes on page 2 of the Greenhouse Gas Annual Report are a welcome addition, but they come in the form of hyperlinks, which obviously don't work on paper documents. I'm fine with leaving them in for electronic versions, but actually hyperlinks don't necessarily continue to work for all eternity. As a record of what we're actually worrying about here, it would be good to have the full references with author, date and title of the document so that we know what we're referring to. I would emphasize it is a welcome addition so that we actually know the guidance that's being used to produce that report. That has been added. That's good. Right. The elephant that's been in the room waiting to be unleashed, probably for the last 2 years, in fact, is that the latest version of the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan surely should give highest priority to the issue of our largest source of emissions, which is our housing stock. This has become doubly important in recent months because of the rapid rise in energy costs. Surely coming up with an at-scale programme of energy efficiency improvements should be the #1 priority, both to reduce emissions and to alleviate the threat of fuel poverty for some of our most financially challenged residents. And yet, decarbonisation and improvement of energy efficiency in our housing stock doesn't appear once in the foreword. In the annex on page 89 of our papers, sorry, I was going to read out an annex number, but unfortunately the labelling of our annexes is completely at sea in this, which is a little bit disconcerting. It sort of undermines credibility of documentation. But if we refer to page 89, short-term action items B01 to B16, covering the period 2020 to 2023, address our housing stock, and there's some good actions in that. But of these, only 2 have been completed. 4 are on track, 7 are behind schedule, and 1 is recognised as not being achievable in the specified time frame. And to add to that, I also note that in the 1Q CPR, the trial deep retrofit project on 7 homes at Oxford Ridge is unlikely to have gone out to tender until round about now. So there's no chance of having the work completed and evaluated on its level of success in time to influence the 2023-24 budget and work programme cycle. Also, having recruited a very able asset manager for housing, Waverley's unfortunately been unable to retain him. Now, Annex 1 in item B15 Annex 1 as labelled, but I think it's actually Annex 3 or maybe even Annex 4. Item B15 indicates that appointment of a new asset manager is in hand. So can I recommend, based on all the comments I've made, that we consider and maybe discuss making two points to executive. Firstly, that we recommend that the importance attributed in the plan to improvements in energy efficiency for our existing housing stock is increased, because it's way the largest source of emissions in the things that we do in this council. And secondly, that the new housing asset manager, as and when they are available to do so, is asked to address both ONS committees, either jointly or individually, as soon as possible and is convenient, so that the committees can understand how he or she plans to manage the direction of travel indicated in the recently approved housing asset management strategy. Put the elephant back now. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mark. Did you get all of that down? If you want any clarification.
Yeah, well, I was going to maybe suggest that the second one about inviting the asset manager, you make that an action rather than a recommendation, because I think you can demand rather than suggest that.
Yeah, okay, well, I think we can do that. I just, before I open up again, the retrofit does concern me. One, how long it takes, but to get skilled craftsmen at the moment, you know, as I know with my daughter's house, when they say, yes, we can do it, it'd be 6 months before we can send a plumber out. It'll be early next year. So to do all of our properties, you know, we may need to actually start employing them ourselves if we're going to really be serious, because if you go to the outside world, and I tell you what, they charge a fortune, we're in the wrong business. So I think that's a very good point, because that is our biggest hit, but actually it's the most, probably the complicated and hardest to achieve. But I think we've got that down. We'll do it as we'll ask them that we want them to come and speak to us rather than as a recommendation, to talk that through, and then maybe a good plan, and we'll be satisfied. But I think we need to hear that plan and be satisfied that it is going to do what it says it's going to do. So, right, opening it up, more comments.
did have one comment, and I was looking on the key priorities and targets, which is on page 19 or page 119 of these minutes. And it's number 2 in the blue box, and the first little arrow says, actively working with Surrey County Council, reduce the volume of traffic on our roads and encourage a radical transformation of our transport infrastructure in favour of active travel. And this is our key priority. I just throwing it out there, but how do we suppose we're going to reduce the volume of traffic on our roads?
I mean, part of that will be trying to get a better bus service. Of course, in rural areas, it's a lot harder than if you're in a town centre somewhere in Surrey, where buses and public transport are a lot better. It's got to, the only way of doing it is better public services and the ability to walk and cycle. But if you live in a village, well, I wouldn't want to walk from my village to Cranley every day. One, because it's a long walk, but 2, you'd probably get wiped out going down Wildwood Lane. So,
And I would say that our voters probably don't want us to reduce the volume of traffic on our roads. You know, I think we ask them, is that what they want? When they think about it, they'd say they don't want that. I don't know what they do want, but they probably don't want us to actively try and reduce the volume of traffic.
I mean, and the problem is this is about changing culture. And culture, especially in rural areas, is a lot harder to change because people have driven everywhere because there's no buses. Councillor Coburn, you got
Sorry, it's not your fault, Chairman. When you say changing cultures, you know, I just bristle. I did not get elected to tell other people how to behave. I'm sorry. And if people want to drive, and I think it's perfectly within their right to drive. And this idea that if you make it difficult enough for people to drive, by sort of narrowing roads, doing all sorts of things, we'll all miraculously get on our bikes. It's just not going to happen. You mentioned buses. We've tried buses, as you know, for as long as I've been a councillor, we've been trying to improve buses. And in fact, they've been going down and down and down. We've had some successes, but then they go down again. I just think at some point we have got to realise that the car is here to stay. I don't believe you can put a genie back in a bottle. I never have. What we have to do is have better cars. What we have to do is manage those cars better. But the idea that, we're all going to be told how we go from A to B, I just find it absolutely appalling. And I really don't want to sort of sign up to that. I mean, I'll help, I'll encourage, I'll do all sorts of things. But I will not tell people how they should travel from A to B. I just do not think it's my role, and it's not one that I want anyway. Thank you.
and I totally agree. We don't want to tell people what in some areas you can give them options that you would like them to take. It'd be good if they took, but you're not going to tell people, because as soon as you tell somebody, they'll do exactly the opposite. So, Councillor Foraszewski.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. And I think if we're going to do that, we should lead by example. Those 3 colleagues this evening have all come from the same area, but in separate cars. So I think we should be saying. An
electric car though.
Yeah.
So I'd do my bit.
No, if we'd come with you, we'd be saving on petrol as well. So, but it's just a great example of how we're saying what we're saying, but we're not doing what we're doing. But I want to come back to just a couple of points which I think are doable, are things that we can say are achievable. And one of those is the one I forgot, is I know many people don't like it, but the No Mow May. And I know that they're saying they've got an implementation October 22. Now that's something that's achievable. It can be done and it can be effective, and we can say we are actually doing something. It's sometimes the simplest things that we can actually do that make a little bit of a difference. And also things like the L4, so the tree and woodland management policy. Are we working with the Forestry Commission? Are we working with other organisations where they will actually come out and give landowners or anybody who's interested in planting a little area of trees, they'll come out and give them advice? Are we telling our residents that is something that can be done as well? And those are the things that I think are achievable, and we can actually put it down in a report like this to say, yeah, and it's also stuff that doesn't cost a huge amount of money, but is absolutely doable. Thanks again for letting me come back, Chairman.
It's absolutely fine, and you're absolutely right. You know, we should be putting what we can do. You know, these can become very aspirational. You know, like to convert 4,000, retrofit 4,000 houses. That isn't going to happen. That's going to take decades to do that, or through natural change. But it's not something we can do straight away. Any other points, Councillor Darcy?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think part of the problem is certainly in Bramley, people want to reduce the volume of traffic, but they want to reduce the volume of other people's traffic, not their own, and that's the problem. We certainly don't want all the lorries that are going up and down in 281. You know, but equally we want what they're providing, I suppose. So there's a kind of conflict there. But I think to say that people don't want less traffic isn't true. I think they do. It's just that they haven't quite worked out how they're going to achieve that without it affecting them. And that is our problem. But part of the process here is to try and educate people to understand that if we do want to reduce emissions, we're all going to have to do something. It's not somebody else will do it and we just have to think, you know, it's up to them. We all have to do it. So that, I think, is an important message that this needs to include, which is the education side of it. It's not about telling people you have to do this. It's about explaining to them why, if we don't do it, we'll all be a hell of a lot worse off. So it's in all our interests to sacrifice a bit now. I think that needs to be made clear, because it isn't. And I just wanted to say a little bit before you mentioned about with the planning, the fact that it would be nice to have a kind of checklist thing. Well, I prepared a checklist with our policies to do with biodiversity, sustainability. I think it's probably 3 years ago now, and sent it to the planning department. And I'm afraid they just sat on it. They keep promising that they're going to do something with it, but I'm still waiting. I see it's now included in here, but only mentioning sustainability. So I'm hopeful that at some point, eventually, after 3 years, something will come of it. But I have to say it's very disappointing. But I suppose we have to expect that these things take a long time, however frustrating it might be. So I do hope that we can raise this again as a group and say, we need these checklists, because in order to make sure that we apply our policies that we already have correctly and as to the highest level we can, but also so that we know what people are proposing, because one of the problems we get with planning applications is it's not clear what they're proposing in terms of solar panels, or are they using heat pumps, or are they using gas boilers or whatever. It's just not there. The information isn't given. So we need to ask them to give us that information. So when we're making our decisions, we're properly informed.
Okay, well, we'll certainly include that with our feedback recommendations and with the question, as a checklist was prepared 3 years ago, can that now be confirmed it's still up to date and implemented as a matter of fact? It just makes so much sense. It's so simple. It should never take 3 years. So I'm sure Mark will chase that one up for us. So thank you for raising that. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. What it is doing is making everyone discuss and talk and think. Councillor Seaborn is putting pen to paper, making notes, typing them up, reading them out. We all need to have aspirations. It's made us thoughtful, much more thoughtful than we have been in the past, perhaps. It's making us really, really think. And that is an important stage, because until that happens, nothing will change. And I agree in some way, I find this difficult, but it's true with Councillor Coburn. You can't change people overnight. They have to come round to a different way of thinking, different way of approaching problems. And so it is very challenging, the climate change policy, challenging us all. And I think that is good. So I say thank you very much to the team that have done it. Thank you.
Well, you're absolutely right. And, it's aspirations, but we do need to turn aspirations into action. And if we can help that process and encourage it and suggest and everything else, then we've done our role in scrutiny. So you're absolutely right. We just got to do that final push into some sort of change. So it's not just a talking shop, it's actually something that's come out of the meeting. Any other comments from around the room on this item? Okay. But point for Tini, I think this is a really good document. This is never going to be an easy document to produce because it's a living document. And I hope you take all the comments in the goodwill that they've been given, that we can helps to continue to improve your document. Mark will do a list of all those action points so he can feed back to us. Mark, do you need to clarify any of those points before we move on?
Would it be okay if I just run through them quickly and checked what we'd got? So I think the suggestion on planning was that wanted to see, rather than LPP, sorry, I may get lost with the acronyms here, so stop me if I do, LPP1 kind of reviewed, you wanted to see the actions with it the kind of climate change bits within it refreshed. And
Not quite. So no. Okay. So I think LPP1 has policies that we could be looking at to help us in our sort of deliberations we're planning to make sure it meets our climate. And we're not using those. Of course you can.
If I could, Chairman, just to say, it fits in with what Councillor Darcy said, because it's part of the checklist. You know, the checklist should say, you know, have you looked at the climate change policies, CC1 to CC4, then the biodiversity policies and all the sustainability policies, because they are there. It's the implementation. So it's the checklist, you know, that is really important.
So they're there, but we haven't got a checklist and we don't actually make sure that they're implemented and used to their full.
So you want a checklist and you want the existing policies, could we say applied more consistently? Is that?
Applied will be good. That we use our policies that we have written and approved.
Use existing policies.
Martin, did you want to add to that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to send the checklist that I drew up to Mark.
Yeah.
It's all nicely done with little tick boxes and things, and the wording of all the policy.
Okay.
I think you wanted to see some sort of, maybe less in the specific actions, but more in the overview, a kind of reflection of the energy crisis. Is that fair? You're looking at me blankly, which is worrying me.
My comments about this green table on pages 123, it doesn't, if anything is meant to be happening in the next 6 months, because you've got target dates here. As I read that, that is going to be delivered as a short-term action. Anything that's been delivered in the next 6 months to 9 months, you need to have a look at it. And because we're seeing here a number of things that feel like they're out of date. The energy one, the working from home, the staff cars, and then particularly this transfer of councillors' papers to electronic. We just, if anyone thinks that's a feasible option for December of this year, I don't think it is.
I actually randomly can probably help you on the paper ones, because Resources ONS last year made a recommendation about the wording of a bit of the I think it was the Democratic Services Service Plan, where it was talking about getting over to paper, and they asked for clarification that councillors wouldn't be forced off paper, and that recommendation was accepted. So I think when it talks about removing barriers, I think that's, it's not my department, but I believe that's not with the vision to being like, and then we take the papers away. It's carrots rather than sticks, I think.
The agreement was that we would be paper less, not paper free.
So less paper going out,
yes,
but still those who want it. That's what that means. So I think what you're saying is where paper use can be reduced, it will be, but those people, myself, who will not sit on a little 7-inch screen and try and read 200 pages. I cannot do that. My eyes will not allow me to do that. I still enjoy getting my papers in the post. So does that help with what we mean?
Yes, so maybe review timescales in light of the energy crisis.
Well, yeah, because we're not accepting it. There will be some exceptions.
Yeah, okay. Replacing hyperlinks with full, some kind of recognized referencing standard. Giving maybe residential energy efficiency a kind of higher priority within the kind of hierarchy of the document. Is that? Yeah, okay. Documents. I think, Chair, you were suggesting, I don't know if you were intending to make that as a full-on resolution, but directly employing kind of tradesmen to do the retrofits.
Well, I think we need to see the plan on how we're going to retrofit first. And then I think falling out of that plan should be how you're going to achieve it and what's the cost going to be, how you're going to, and that could be one of the solutions, that you actually have your own people. It might be just too expensive, too complicated, but if you've got 4,000 to do, how the hell are you going to do them? If you get one a week done, you'll do really well. So I think the plan on how the retrofit's going to happen, because we accept it's going to be higher on the list of priorities because it's the biggest thing that we can do. So how are they going to do it? When are they going to do it? What's the cost of it? How are you going to get this? That will fall out. So I'm not saying we go and employ, but a plan should consider all options, including difficulties with getting people in, skilled tradesmen versus having your own staff, etc., etc. But we're certainly not saying go out and employ a load of people.
I think Councillor Darcy, you mentioned you wanted to see kind of more of the rhetoric about it kind of being a shared endeavour, kind of mutual sacrifice for the common good. Is that?
No one's your sacrifice is bigger than mine.
I think I was trying to emphasise that some of the ideas were as much about aspiration and education and encouragement as they were about trying to deliver something ourselves.
Aspiration, encouragement. Okay.
Yeah.
Aspiration and encouragement.
Because you need to do both. You need to do stuff, but you also need to encourage other people to do things and to understand why it's necessary to do these things.
And I've sort of left this to last because I think it might be the most divisive. I think there was some suggestion about maybe removing or altering or limiting or excluding for the rural areas from the scope of the sort of language about reducing volumes of traffic. Is that?
I don't think it was talking about reducing. I think it was change. Culture is probably the wrong word, and I accept what Carol said about the word's never a good word. But it's about, we can do everything, but if actually everybody just does nothing at all, and it's really going back to your point, then we are limited to what we can achieve. So the exact word, it's not changing culture, it's changing availability, changing the options. I'm not sure how you would word it, but it's not necessarily saying to people, you'll walk to Cranley and you're not going to drive, because I'm going to jump in the car. Carol, have you got a better way of maybe describing that?
No, probably not. But no, it's certainly not exclusive to rural areas. I mean, outskirts of many of the towns, there is no alternative. And I'm all for exploring alternatives if they exist, and doing what we can to introduce improvements. But I think we've just got to have this realism. And I think, alongside the aspiration, you have to have the realism, and you must stop making people feel guilty. This 4 wheels bad, 2 legs, 2 wheels good thing is really getting very boring, and it's annoying a lot of people because we don't seem to have that just moderate language, which we all know there's a problem with the planet. We all watch David Attenborough. We don't, you know, that we don't need people to do anything extreme. Just show us a picture of the sea with loads of bottles in, and we all stop using them, you know. And I think this is something we should be doing, is you know, taking away that guilt, supporting positive measures by all means, but not labeling people as sort of good or bad. You know, people drive cars, that's entirely up to them. The better the car or the less polluting, the better for all of us. But, you know, I do find some of the rhetoric around this really accusatory, and I just think it's counterproductive. You know, four wheels are not totally bad at all. And in fact, four wheels get families to all sorts of places that they wouldn't go if they didn't have them. So, you know, I just think it's the language that's used that upsets me over this. So I think we, you know, by all means support alternative methods of transport. You know, you mentioned different fuels early on. I mean, things will change, but please, you know, take away that sort of, I don't know, trying to make people feel guilty for what they're doing. I think that's the bit that really affects me. I mean, if you live in certain places, you have no alternative at the moment. You know, you've got 6 or 7 hills to get down to town. I'm not going to do that on a bike. And there's no buses. So, you know, it's the end of the story as far as I'm concerned at the moment.
So I suppose it's about our messaging. It's the messaging that maybe, and then when that's not saying it's just a council, it's also councillors, the way we see that messaging. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Just one last point, if I may. Page 118, focus on organisational emissions. The last paragraph says reduce car journeys for commute by Waverley staff by 60%, consistent with the work done on the Where Work Happens project by 2025, and promote zero carbon transport, including active transport. Well, councillors have to come into our meetings, don't we? Otherwise we can't vote.
Yeah.
So what happens to councillors? Are we allowed to work from home and on a Zoom meeting and vote to stop emissions? I mean, my fellow councillors have all shared a car journey. Some of us work during the day, so we can't always share car journeys. We have to come straight from work to here, like I have to. So if 60% reduction of staff working from the office and working from home, what about councillors? Just a point.
Absolutely. I think we're still in the problems. If it's a public meeting where we vote, then we have to be in person, and that will take primary legislation to change. I know, especially in the county, the amount of meetings I do on Zoom, you know, 4 or 5 a day, and I wouldn't get around the county any other way. Wouldn't have the time to do it. So when it's not at, you know, public meeting, I do it, but I have to go into certain meetings to vote as the people here do. But it's a very valid point. So it's looking at, if you've got a meeting, can you do it on Zoom? Is it a meeting, say, with a planning officer? In the past, I'll be absolutely honest, I would come in, because I think it's nothing like seeing the whites of the eyes when you sit across the table and have an issue of a planning. I've always done it that way. Now I've started to do some on Zoom. You know, I prefer it to be the other way, but that's my little contribution to keep my petrol down.
Just in response to your comments, Councillor Wicks, the LGA are still pushing government to change the primary legislation so that we can use virtual meetings again. It's been taken to government 6 or 7 times so far, and every time they've rebuffed it, but they are still pushing for it.
Okay, Councillor Dixon.
I'm sorry, I don't think this short-term actions on page 127. We've got this target date column, which has got dates which are in the next 3 months. Well, it's not just a question of looking at 1 or 2 items on this list. It's looking at everything that might be delivered in the next 6 months and asking ourselves, is it going to be delivered? Is it going to be delivered as described? Or, and if not, what is the new target date? I think this whole table is not very useful to us. because it's saying here, you know, so many things in here that are going to be delivered in December or October or January of next year, which I just don't think are going to be delivered. So this, I don't know what this short-term action plan is. It just needs to be a more, if this is what we're currently doing to achieve carbon neutrality, it needs to be absolutely clear that's exactly what we're doing. It's not clear at the moment.
Okay, can you capture that one?
Something like either review the date or review what it is we're saying we will achieve by that date.
Okay, so we can do that as well. Any other comments before we get to the recommendations? Anybody?
So just very quickly, Chairman, I do think it's important to know this, the dates. I take on board exactly what said. It's a point well made. But I do think it's worth as well highlighting some of the things that have been done and can be done and what they are, and just to prove that it can work if it's realistic and achievable. And there's a couple of examples in there that's already demonstrated that. Thank you, Chairman.
No, that's a good point. As I said, you know, to Fatini earlier, you know, this is a bit of a poison chalice because we're looking at the issues that we feel aren't quite right, but there is a lot of very good stuff and have taken this a tremendous way in a short period of time. So you're absolutely right. So if we can go to the recommendations, I think I've got 3. Yeah. We've got these. So the first one was to recommend that the ONS notes the progress made on the CNAP during 2021 attached in Annex 1. I think we've noted with a large number of comments, which we can then put in. So the GHG report attached in Annex 2, so I can get my papers right, and agrees published on the Waverley Borough Council website. Views on that, people, please. On the phones. Are people happy that that should be published on the council website, or does it need further clarification? Councillor Seymour.
Well, just with the comment that I made earlier about by all means have the hyperlinks in, but add references so that we can track back to the original documentation on which it's based. Otherwise, yeah, it gets better each iteration. And
Thank you, Fatini, for your input. So if we move to agenda item 9, which is the Leisure Centre Contract Task and Finish Group, got Councillor Baker at the back who wishes to make a comment on this, and I'm more than happy to do that. Councillor Ejoy. Oh, please. Oh, so hang on a second. We can, because we've done the main item, but I'm trying to find through my papers. Which page was this?
This is on page 25.
of the agenda or 25 of the?
25 of the agenda, page 7 of the corporate performance report.
I believe that falls within the resources remit, so I'll be discussing that next week. But I can arrange for that to be fed in. If you email that to me, I'll pass that on to the chair, and so they're aware of that comment.
I thought I was losing it when I couldn't find it, but of course it's in the wrong section. That's why I didn't see that. But we'll make sure that's fed back. So thank you for that. So we'll move on to agenda item number 9, which is Mark and Councillor Forojewski, and we have got a councillor who wishes to raise a question. Do you want to do that at the start, or do you want the introduction and then come in?
I think I'd like to hear the introduction, but is that what you're proposing? And then I come in and speak.
Absolutely fine. We'll hear from the experts, and then we'll open it up, and I'll come to you first.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to recap that back in March, at our March meeting, the committee delegated authority to the group to write its interim scoping report document, which was ratified at our last meeting in June. The scoping document highlighted an ambitious and necessary timetable. Our role was to look in depth at the current leisure programme, the leisure management contract of all of the 5 leisure centres, which the contract actually expires on the 30th of June 2023. Because of the sheer size and timetable of the contract, detailed work could not be delayed. The group looked at active communities and an extensive review of the 11 key performance indicators, of which I believe the original document is over 700 pages, hence the need for a group like this. We discussed that in depth at our last meeting, which was on the 23rd of June. And after a detailed and lengthy discussion, the work of the task and finish group was concluded. The recommendations were sent to the portfolio holder for health, wellbeing, parks and leisure, and on the 4th of July accepted them in full. I think that's testimony to the efforts of the members and the officers involved in this project. I'm delighted to present before you on pages 137, item 2, recommendations 2.1a, B, C and D and 2.2. The document's very clear in what it says. I don't think there's any point for me to go over it again, but what I would like to just end by saying is to thank Tamsin, Kevin, members of the group and members of the committee, and to you, Chairman, for the opportunity, for the contribution that we've made to this very exciting project. And I'd just like to end by saying Jenny Else was a formidable character within that task group, and I very much want to put it on record, my thanks to her as well. So, Chairman, that's all I have to say on the matter. It was a very humbling experience, and I was so impressed with the work that Kevin and his team have done. Tasmin has been a real, she's really fought your corner on this one, and I think she's done a great job. So thank you very much indeed. It was an absolute privilege.
Thank you for that. I'd like to take all the accolades for that. I think it's Kelvin who's done the work, not Kevin. But I will take the thanks as well.
I know your name very well. If I just said Kevin then, my sincere apologies.
We don't often get thanks, so I'll take it anyway. I'd also like, I mean, and to yourself, Mary, I think you've been absolutely brilliant taking this forward on behalf of this group, and you've really been able to get into the details. So thank you. And I also thank Kevin and Tamsin. So before we open it up, Councillor Baker, I think you've got a couple of comments. Please, floor is yours. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. Great. Well, yes, I'd like to congratulate those who managed to plough through all this and put their shoulders to the wheel, because I realised what a mammoth task it was. I haven't really seen the detail, so that's something I would like to know quite a lot more about, actually. And let me start by saying that I represent Milford Ward. It is right in the middle of the borough. And I have long had a concern for about 20 odd years, actually, because the bricks and mortar leisure facilities are on the outskirts of the borough, and much of the time, and to a very large extent, they serve people who live outside Waverley. What I find living in Hambledon, which is not that far up the road from Milford or Whitley, which I used to represent, I find that the nearest leisure centre for me to go to is actually Broadwater, and that entails going through the whole of the borough of Godalming, which I think is undesirable. And it's true of whichever of those leisure centres I choose to go to. So that is my starting point. That is good for Milford as much as it is for where I currently live. So what I picked up here was that there were concerns that people who live away from the bricks and mortar facilities, if they were deprived, that might prove a barrier to their going to the centres, and that there was a proposal that, well, it's hoped that it forms a recommendation, which I think it does, that there is leisure community outreach provision. And what I really want to know is just what form that can take, because nothing replicates a swimming pool, nor a gymnasium. There may be private facilities around, but certainly some of them are too expensive for a lot of us. And so I'm rather bothered about the fact that there's absolutely no detail attaching to this. And I'd just like to know what it is. And certainly there should be provision for the deprived, but could I also say that it might be an idea to consider that the communities, small as they are in the villages, whether they're deprived or not, but deprivation certainly needs to be considered. And in a conversation today, somebody mentioned to me that we have Ukrainians living maybe mostly in the towns, but I know, I think 5 families in Chiddingfold. So I don't know what their resources are, but I thought that I would suggest that this gets some emphatic follow-up, and I'd really like to know more about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I mean, obviously today is not about going into too much detail, but if Kelvin, if you'd like to just give an overview, and if you want sort of the more in-depth information, then I'm sure you can meet outside. But Kelvin, if you want to.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, exactly. And I think Councillor Goroszewski has gone through, there's a huge amount of data and detail that we had to go through as a task and finish group. And I really appreciate the time that members gave to that, because it is an amazing amount of detail that we had to go through over several sessions. But just to pick up on a couple of things, when we talk about, this is about preparing for a tender. So the detail, we don't have the detail at the moment. What we've done is in essence, challenge the contractors that have shown an interest in running our centres in the future. And we have said, and the task and finish group endorsed that there should be an active communities programme that reaches out to the areas, as you say, because unfortunately you can't build a leisure centre in every pocket of Waverley. So it was noted that people have to travel a certain distance to get to some of our leisure centres. So the challenge we placed with the future contractors is, how will they address that? How will they reach our more deprived areas? How will they reach our rural areas and deliver a service? It won't be a swimming pool. I apologise that I can't deliver that for you, but we can deliver group exercise programmes. We can use the expertise that exists within the leisure centres and use that as an outreach sort of process that helps give well-being and exercise classes outside of the centre. So hopefully we will have answers to that when the tenders are returned in November. So we're currently out to tender and we have 3 contractors that have expressed an interest. So 3 of the major sort of operators within the industry. So that's really promising. What will happen at the next stage is we will evaluate their offer, in essence, against criteria that some of which are set out in this paper, the Active Communities Programme. We will talk about sustainability and their environmental offers. So all of those will be assessed at the next stage. So please, I'm happy to meet with yourself and Tamsin, my leisure services manager, and we can go through it in more detail with you so you're aware. But please be assured that all of those things that you've raised are being addressed, and we hope the contractors will give us some answers that will improve the offer we have. And just on one very small note on with regard to Ukrainians, I can send details round to the committee, but we are currently offering over, I think it's over 450 memberships to the free memberships to the gyms that exist throughout our borough. And in addition to that, certainly at Hazelham and Farnham, we've had very good attendance to English classes within the centres as well, where we've up to 30 or 40 Ukrainians attend regularly. So I can send the details around. I'm really pleased with what places and ourselves have been able to deliver for the Ukrainians that have joined us in Waverley. But there's a lot of detail. I think the Task and Finish group summarised the actions really well. The answers we won't know until the tenders are returned. We evaluate.
Thank you very much. May I come back on that, Chairman? Thank you very much for explaining that to me, because I just didn't know what stage we'd got to, quite honestly. I'd be very interested, through you, Chairman, in meeting with the officers, if that's an offer that I can take up. I'd be absolutely delighted, because this has suddenly just sort of sprung up without me having, well, me noticing what was going on, I think I'll say. And I'd be delighted to find out more about it. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I'm sure the members here wouldn't thank me if they had to go through several hundred pages. In addition to this, would probably be 500 or 600 pages if we took a lot more data. So by them taking it away, doing all the groundwork and looking at all the issues, then coming to us with the concerns is absolutely the right way. But the offer's there, and that would be good. Mary, is there anything you want to just finish?
Kelvin, you summed up beautifully. And yes, you're absolutely right. And actually, thank you for raising that. I think it shows great keenness on your part to support the leisure and what's going on, because the focus of the task group was to look at the fine detail, of which there was this committee could never have achieved it. It could never have achieved it. And they were always up against the clock with the process within the tendering process as it went along. So there was a huge amount of documents. To say just the KPI alone, correct me if I'm wrong, was 700 pages. We would never have had time. This was just a great way of doing the project, getting to the result that we needed to be, and in a timely fashion. But yeah, thank you for your interest. And it's well worth listening to what these guys have got to say, because it's phenomenal, the amount of work that they've actually done. So thank
Chairman,
you.
may I just come back with a further suggestion? I'm assuming that this 700-page document was actually split up into sections. Would there be part of it that it would be worth my while reading before I have a meeting with the officers? Would that be sensible?
I'll leave it to Kelvin to look at that, because you know, if it can be done and there's something which just gives you the summary, fine, but you don't want the 700 pages. I'll leave that for you to take offline. If there is a document, and you can decide between yourselves. Okay, anything else, Councillor Reid?
Could I please have clarification? The tendering is to the service providers, isn't it?
Yep, Kelvin, do you want to?
Yes, that's correct. So
Thank you.
it's, you know, like Places Leisure currently run our facilities for us.
Because in Cranley, there are rumours that it's to be put out to be built. So you're going to contractors. So I just wanted to get that clear, really. And also I would like to thank Mary and her team, because in the ward that I share with Mary and with Councillor Townsend on my left here, we are at a very deprived ward, and we should not forget that the journeys that people have to make from the outskirts of our wards, because our wards and Cranley and Ewhurst are on the far eastern edge of this borough, and they too, all of them, have a long journey to make, and an expensive one if they don't have other means of transport. Thank you.
Okay. Anything from anybody else, as we're 1 minute past 9, so I'm going to be, I'll let you come back once and then I will move. Was there a further point you wanted to make? If long as
I
it's
wanted
brief.
to make everybody laugh, and I want this to be kept in the tender when it's finally awarded. I was told by places for leisure, whatever it's called, the current contractors, that that you can swim for free if you're 80 or over, which is, I think, a very good thing, and I don't think many people know that.
Okay, well, I'm sure once the contract and everything's done, that all those type of issues can be communicated through the normal way. One quick point, and I'm going
Very
to...
quickly, and thank you, Councillor Reid. I appreciate your kind words, but I'm not sure if I heard you right when we talked about the leisure centre in Cranley. I wonder, Calvin, if you could just pick up on that to make it clear.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor. So yeah, for clarity, we are going out to tender for the leisure operators to run our facilities, but as part of that tender, we have included the new build leisure centre for Cranley. So they will be tendering against not only the current building, but what we propose to build in the future. So there will be another work stream, Councillor Reid, which will bring forward the new Cranley Leisure Centre project as well. But it does form part of it. We are testing the market at the time of going out to tender.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm actually gobsmacked I've kept us roughly on time. So now there's the recommendations for agenda item 9. Are they agreed? Fantastic. I'm going to finish this meeting 3 minutes late, but actually I think we've achieved quite a lot. So thank you for your contributions. Thank you for your time going through the papers and your questions. Unless there's anything else, Kimberly, Mark, I'm going to finish the meeting. Thank you, everybody.